All right. Well, Josh, here we are. We're already, the little red button is already going in my top left of my screen here. So that means we're live. Everything you say can and will be used again.
I'm used to it.
None of those things. No, what is that? What's the word I'm looking for? Miranda? What's the word what's the things they say when they
I
arrest
think that
people?
that's it. The Miranda rights.
Miranda rights. So no, I'm not reading you your Miranda rights. This is a conversation. I'm excited, dude. I have your book, but I wasn't sure if this conversation was going to happen today. So it is at home. It is not with me.
I trust you.
Yeah, no, I
believe you.
there's kind of a good faith showing of like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
but it's been a chaotic day. We made this work, and I'm grateful for the time, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So your new book, it's artistic and awesome and challenging as they always are. So what led you to write this latest book, How to Die? Hit us with the motivation, the inspiration. What brought this into being?
Well, it started years and years ago before I wrote any Christian nonfiction. I thought like I had this idea to rewrite the Sermon on the Mount and through a different voice, and an attempt to just recapture the some of the subversive, like how provocative the sermon is, by injecting all the historical scholarship that you would have to footnote, or consult a commentary, but just somehow inject that back into the teaching itself. And I messed with it for a little while and found it to be too challenging at the time. I went and wrote a bunch of other stuff and sort of came back around to this idea. By that time, it had evolved into an idea for more of a robust book on discipleship. And I pitched it to the publisher as like a teaching book, as like a more essay style, which I've done before. Certainly the book I wrote on art is very like essay-like in that it presents arguments in a structured way to come to a conclusion, to convince the reader of a point or several points that I'm trying to make. And the How to Die started that way, as more like a sermon-y teaching kind of book. And the more that I wrote in that direction, the more it bored me. And I thought, oh man, if this is boring to me, it's going to bore a reader to tears. Good Lord. And I fought against it and struggled with it for weeks of the initial draft, and was like, every day I'd go away to write, and I'd go on these writing breaks and from work and attempt to get some pages done, and then I'd be sending messages to my wife being like, this thing sucks. I can't find it. And then at some point I had written a piece that became a chapter in the book called A Short Note on the History of Life and Death, which is sort of a summation of the entire story of the Bible. Very big, broad strokes, but the major points and themes of the entire meta-narrative of the Bible. And I was like, oh, I like this. I think that this is working. But I was like, where does this even go in a book? It's so different from all the teaching stuff that I had written. And so then I had the idea to attempt to write something, the entire draft, the entire book, without footnotes. That was my first idea. It was like, what if you could finish the whole thing with no annotations? Because the footnotes, like all my other books are filled with them. They're good. But that essentially means that you're referencing other sources. And so the text is not, in a sense, self-sufficient. You're quoting other people, you're bringing in citations from statistics or commentaries or whatever it might be. So what if you could write something with no footnotes? And then I thought, like, what if I could write something that has no teaching voice at all? Like the entire book is just in more like a literary prose. And then that became very interesting to me, and I was no longer bored writing. But the whole time I was writing, I was having a blast. I was like, this is really fun. And the most entertaining thing to me was finding ways to reword biblical stories, teachings of Jesus, and especially the parables of Jesus in a different voice. Certainly not intended to improve upon them in any way, but
Sure.
just offer like a different angle that would hopefully like wake the reader up to something that's become deeply familiar to them. And as soon as I gave my position to, or myself permission to write like that, the whole thing became very exciting to me and a lot of fun. But I was like, I have no idea if this is going to work. I have no idea if I'm going to hand this back to the publisher and they're going to be like, what in the world is this? What did you do? I sat with a pastor friend of mine yesterday who has the book. He hasn't read it yet, but he was like, I started to like look through it and I was like, what in the world is this? Like, this is the most weirdly formatted Christian nonfiction that I've ever. He's like, how did you get that? He's an author too. He's like, how did you get the publisher to let you do this? And that doesn't mean it's necessarily good or bad, but it certainly means that it's unlike stuff that I've written in the past, unlike the kind of traditional Christian nonfiction format. So it started as a book on discipleship and then became like an attempt to do something, I think, to wake people up to old stories and make them provocative again. You have to do something really different. So that's where How to Die came from.
Yeah, I feel like your artist instincts kicked in there, the risk-taking side I'm sure that you've had throughout the various things that you've tried. How much do you feel like we are boxed in because, the industry of publishing and the demands of things being recognizable and sort of in a box that people can put themselves into, or even the citation thing is interesting to me because there's an insecurity, I think, that can drive a writer to think, well, why would people just listen to me, right? Surely I've got to put in some C.S. Lewis quotes for anyone to take this seriously. So I don't know, just do you feel like that's limited the kind of array of healthy and good books and across all of the mediums, probably not just books, that are being produced because we are limited by our own insecurities or the trappings of the industry? And I don't want to sound overly pejorative, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, as well as a writer, it's like there's certain expectations for Christian quote unquote content. And, I've talked about this ad nauseum and in the book about Christian art, but it does become an inevitable box for the Christian artist that in some cases I think probably provides helpful structure, and in other cases, and maybe more cases, becomes shackles, that inhibit creative freedom and thus inhibit the amount of like sincere inspiration or like that you can get across to the listener, the reader, the audience, whoever that might be. And I think that there's a time and a place to implement structure based on expectation, and it works very well. I mean, like I happen to, and this sounds like I'm trying to like hype, or like pretentious or something. I really don't mean it that way, but I'm wired aesthetically. I like to try to go against trend, whatever that to a fault. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So that's where my mind goes anyway, which is like, oh, how do I do it not like someone else or what the expectation is or what has been done? That's not always a great thing. It can work against the artist as well, and it certainly can work against the audience. But I think that the kind of format that we've come to expect from Christian nonfiction is actually really similar to the format we've come to expect from Christian music. Right. Certainly worship music, which is like there's a template, there's an expectation, a standard to which the artist must adhere. And if you kind of paint outside those lines, then you run the inevitable risk of someone saying like, that's not worship music. Why is it not worship music? Well, it doesn't sound like one of the three megachurch conglomerates that have established the template of modern worship music. Well, that doesn't sound like Christian music, whatever that might be.
Sure.
The same is true of Christian nonfiction, in which you come to basically expecting the guidelines that have been established by non-Christian self-help books, in that you're going to get some cutesy stories from the author's life. You're going to get like an organized argument based on like an essay format, like a grad school essay format, usually at least colloquialized to the degree that it's not super boring to read, because we have academic wings of publishers for those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And you read it because you want to get the content, to make the application, to better your life by the end of the thing. So if it's a book on slowing down, then by the end of it, you're going to have some tips and tricks for slowing down. If it's a book for organization or for certain practice, what I'm getting at. And if you're writing a book about like the big story of Christianity, there is no like little packet of takeaway information at the end, short of this is this incredible, devastating story. And now you have to decide what you do with it. You know what I mean? And so part of me, like I approach these things usually like when it's done, whether it's an album or a book, like when it's done, how do I want that thing to be received? Not just in the specifics of like reading or listening, like, oh, it sounds like, but like when people who experience it, when their minds go to that book or that record, what is like the feeling or the, like, how do they categorize it in their thinking and feeling, because that's what I do. I think of like, oh, this is the record that makes me feel this way, that these are the visuals that it invokes in my imagination, that kind of thing. And How to Die was way less practical than books that I've previously written, like, the art thing, the book on art is like intended to serve a very specific purpose. And so I want to convince people of my arguments. Or I wrote a book on death or deconstruction called Death of Deconstruction. And that's, like it's meant to address a certain conversation. So these aren't bad things. But with How to Die, I had this like thing in my mind that was like, what if it could somehow read like, I think the word picture I made up was like someone was like renovating a monastery and they like moved a bench and found like a box, and there was a journal in the box, and inside was like some anonymous monk had written out like stories from the Bible and blah, blah, blah. And so it was like this personal thing, but also this like really impactful thing because it's stories from the Bible.
Right.
And it feels like something almost like, am I supposed to have this? It feels like that scandalous in some way. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that is cool. That's something I can understand. Not another, because there's a million books on discipleship and a lot of them are very good. Right. So I didn't feel like I had like another, no, I've got the angle everyone else missed on discipleship. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a matter of like giving yourself permission, I think personally, and to break away. And publishing houses and publishers, they adhere to these templates and formats for very good reason. They exist to sell books, and a lot of these people actually do care about books. But at the end of the day, if they don't sell the books, they don't get to be a publishing house anymore. Yeah. And so they have marketing considerations, and marketing considerations are usually about adhering to the template. So the author's responsibility is to somehow see how much they can get away with.
Right.
Yeah, without breaking the pact between the two.
Right. And I guess the $1 million sweet spot is if you can harness that authenticity and it happens to resonate, that's probably when you become very, very successful. Because I think what I love about your approach is that it's authentic, right? And it could be a trope, but it is. Like if I tried to do what you did, it wouldn't work, but you have a unique role to play in the body of Christ, and your maybe subversive instincts or instincts to kind of go, what is not being said or how is it not being done? That's part of who you are. But, we wanted Tim Keller to be Tim Keller, right? We wanted whoever to be. And so it's probably less about, because punk is not punk anymore when you're trying to be punk in a weird paradoxical sense. So you almost just have to be like, what is God asking me to say? What stirs my heart? And then as someone who's trying to produce whatever, if it's music or a book, do that as authentically as you can. And then you better hope it resonates. Otherwise, you and your grandmother will read it, and that's about it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the challenge, is that the fear of the artist is that if I don't consider the audience's expectations, and I will alienate the audience, and the audience will become uninterested, and now I'm speaking into a void. But we ironically know from experience that the best art has always been made without concern for the audience, and then that means the most to the audience, because I want my favorite author to write what they want to write. I've come to trust their
Correct.
instincts, and I don't want them to write otherwise it would be me writing the book. I don't want, you
Mm-hmm.
know, you feel Flannery O'Connor to have been
Right.
like, well, I don't know, would Josh like this?
Right.
Uh, so we end up stifling our own instincts for the sake of the audience, and then in effect rob the audience of the experience that, because we believe that like we have a role to play within the body of Christ, and so the unique role that I've been given, or the much more important role that someone like a Tim Keller has been given. I didn't want Tim Keller to write books like I write, or vice versa. Like, he writes those books and I'm
Yes.
grateful for them. And
Mm-hmm.
I write these books like, I hope maybe someone will be grateful for them. I think that, when you're entrusting someone with like gospel stuff, of course you have a spiritual responsibility to tell the truth, and to have like a certain amount of concern for the audience, in the sense that I want them to know about Jesus. So it's not just like me unhinged doing whatever I want in the whole world. It's Christian nonfiction. It's not a novel. It's not like a
Mm-hmm.
rock record. But beyond that, you still have such a depth of freedom embodied by Jesus. Like,
Yeah.
even just retelling the parables of Jesus, you realize like the sophistication of his genius in communicating these little stories that effortlessly translate across time and
Yeah. It's
space
crazy.
in ways that are just as provocative, and how fun it is. And every time that I would sit down, the parables were my favorite things to redo. And every time I'd sit down with, I made a list of the ones I wanted to work with that I felt like best captured the essence of the themes of the parables. And some of them really small, some of them like I do a very long version of the prodigal son. You sit down to work with them and realize like there's 100 different ways that you could retell this without compromising the essence of the story at all. Like that's how like there's a reason that Aesop's fables or Greek mythology have like been able to be recapitulated over
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is just like a guy up on a hill, be it, you know what I mean, telling these stories that continue to provoke the imagination of people all over the world, which is incredible. And so, like, if that's the kind of like freedom he affords himself to tell some stories that are cryptic and strange and divisive, and then some that are just like, no, that's a very thinly veiled metaphor, and I get exactly what he's saying, because he said at the beginning, this is what God is like, and then tells a story. Then we have freedom to do that, like allow ourselves that same amount of room in which to operate.
Yeah. It's obviously a bit of a cliche subject, but it's the heart of the book, which is, what are the major discipleship issues facing the modern Western person, which I presume would be the majority of those reading this, or just the church in general? What's the thing that needs to die in me? What is the challenges that are my culture? What's the patterns that are impressing upon me that are pulling me away from discipleship to Jesus?
I think that the answer is kind of in the question, it seems to me. And obviously, what do I know? I still have so much to learn and so much to experience. But I think that the invitation to self-denial is as divisive now as it was in the first century. It seems to me that the invitation towards self-denial provokes the human condition the same way in every culture and every time and place. And now there are unique expressions of self-denial that come easy to one person, or come easy in certain cultures and more difficult to others. But the unique expression of those self-denials, those change and evolve over time, you know what I mean? Or the way that we confront them and how much they confront us changes over time. Jesus, when he first said, if anyone wants to follow me, they have to take up their cross first, deny themselves, and then come follow. He said that into an audience that didn't know anything about distractions of touch screens and, the commodification of pornography, all this kind of crazy stuff. But that was an affront to them in the same way that it's an affront to us. I mean, and even in like socio-political discourse, it's amazing to me how much of the vitriol and the infighting and the debates you can distill down, go all the way down the layers and be like, at the end of each conversation is a core defiance against the idea of giving yourself away for the sake of someone else. It's so intrinsic to like the crappiness of humanity that we don't want to deny ourselves, and we don't believe that self-denial is an actual pathway to freedom. And that was I think that maybe that's why for Jesus, self-denial is the prerequisite to discipleship. Not, I mean, of course, we continue to learn what it means to deny ourselves along the road of faithfulness to Jesus, but there has to be some level. That's why, I called the book what I called it. And it's why it begins with an epigraph, the Bonhoeffer quote that's, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die, is because for Jesus, if anyone wants to follow me, first, deny yourself, take up your cross. In at least one, gospel story, like daily, it happens again and again and again, and then come follow me. And then there's more self-denial that happens along the journey of discipleship. And then in that, a person is discovering what it actually means to be human, what it actually means to experience freedom, what it actually means to experience what Jesus called life to the fullest, or the life that is really life. And that never changes. That never goes anywhere. There's no like niche angle. There's no like self-helpy, gimmicky way of putting it that encapsulates it so much better than, it's just the same old story. And I think maybe that's like at the heart of the book, and what I'm facing in this season of being like a pastor too, is like the people, especially in like the modern Western world and the American, like we are very eager, especially in a post 2020 world, for the next, like, what's the next thing? What are we doing? What's the next like inspirational thing that you're going to give me to overcome these pressing, timely obstacles in my life? And because we've been fed a ton of them, we've been fed a lot of like Christian interpretations of self-help. It's like, oh, well, the reason your life sucks is because you're not doing these spiritual practices the way that you should have been doing them. And if you do, your life won't suck anymore. Or the reason that your life sucks is because you didn't pray the right way. You did not understand this verse in the correct context. There's always a trick. There's a secret, and I've got it for you. And like, even in a church context, people come into the environment of the church looking up to the sermon or the culture of the church and being like, so what's the next trick that's going to get me going? Like, oh man, this is so inspiring. I'm ready to go, until it starts to get old. And then you need the new trick again, because we're kind of a content trained culture. And the, quote unquote secular culture is replete with these kinds of things. It's like, oh, the next thing that's going to unlock your best life now is this fad diet, this cold plunge, this rhythm, this sunlight thing, or whatever. And there's some good things in a lot of these. I'm not saying this is all dumb or all bad. Obviously, there's a lot of wisdom in things like fitness or like general rhythms of life and disciplines, blah, blah, blah. But we are often presented these things not as like, oh, here's some generally helpful things for a healthier lifestyle, but more like, this is the one thing you've been missing. And if you have this one thing, it's going to fix everything. And the Christian kind of cultural industry, or however you want to describe it, has picked up on a lot of this and sort of parodied them back to church cultures. This is the one thing you've been missing. I've got the angle. It's when you propose a book to a publisher, you have to present it as exactly that. Like, why is your book the one book? And, and the reality is it's not. Like, there's a zillion books, of course, don't have anything new to say. And, the reality of coming to terms with it, just, it is what it is. As silly as that sounds, that's kind of what I've been embracing as a pastor who has been entrusted with people who are looking for the next trick, as an author who's being asked to write about the next big trick, is I'm embracing there is no trick, like it's the same exact story that started with, in the beginning, God created. And our predicament is the same predicament as Peter, as Paul.
Yeah.
Our heart condition is the same heart condition as Thomas, as Judas, as Moses and Joshua. Like, there's a reason that there's a timelessness to these stories. It doesn't mean that there's no new context. Of course there is. Of course there's new ways to bring these things to bear on our time and place that are important. I'm not knocking themed books. Again, I've written them. They're important. But like the invitation to come and die is just the same invitation. And there's a beauty in being like, that's still our story, and we step in to that story. And there's a timelessness to the invitation, a timelessness to the struggle of being a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, barriers and distractions or impediments to the process of self-denial might change. Now we might be more busy than we ever were, or more distracted than we ever were. But ultimately putting a, time management app on your phone, that might be helpful in some senses, but that's not addressing the core issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's where we're looking for the next Band-Aid. And we got this sort of tumor of selfishness that requires a more complex and invasive process to deal with. And so how do we, because again, I don't want to, the irony of me saying, what's the trick to not fall into the prey of just wanting the next trick, right? It becomes like circular. So what does one do? How do you lay out the process without, again, your book being too like, here are the 10 steps.
Yeah.
What does one do to create the environment, the space, the contemplation required, what do we do to actually get at the root of the problem? Because as you said, and I think of James, where it talks about how do quarrels come about? Well, is it not the selfishness that wars within you? And you look at, when you have little kids, you especially see it, right? It's crystal clear.
These guys are the worst.
Well, they don't even hide it, right?
Yeah,
they're just like my son will just be fighting with his sisters over something that he just knows. He just even admit, like, I don't need this, but I want this, and I'm not going to give it up, and it's going to cause a fight. And that's what we're going to do. And we just get better at masking that, but it really is the same thing manifest in more complex ways. So how do we remove that tumor?
I think that part of beating the self-help fad or overcoming the intrinsic desire for the trick, because I'm not above it either. I'm just as susceptible. We are.
Dude, I've
trained.
cold plunged. I will admit it.
Yeah,
it sucks.
Yeah, me as well. And again, I like the way that you put it, because the time management app is a great example. Is the time management app a good thing? It can be, for sure. And I'm sure for, like a lot of people, a lot of these peripheral things have been contributive to, a better overall lifestyle direction of them, if that makes sense. So, I kind of poke fun at some of these things, and I do this in sermons and stuff. A lot of my people have come to expect it, but it's like, and yet I have like a regimented life style in some sense. I wake up early and exercise. So it's not like I'm saying like, oh, these things are dumb because they don't do the ultimate thing.
Right.
What I'm saying is they don't do the ultimate thing. You know what I mean? And part of coming to terms with that limitation, the limitation of all self-help, the limitation of all life hacks and fad diets and, circadian rhythms is mortality. Is that, there's a great comic strip. I've got to contextualize it like this. I can't just say there's a great issue or I guess strip from Outland, which is an outgrowth of a comic strip called Bloom County by an author called Berkeley Breathed. So and in the 90s, comic strips were a thing. People probably their touchdown point is Calvin and Hobbes as the transcendent comic strip format. Outland and Bloom County were kind of like just beneath that tier of great or popularity. And there was in the 90s, these were things that would be on T-shirts and coffee mugs. The Far Side, Outland, Calvin and Hobbes, which was never merchandised authentically, but blah blah blah. And I think about it all the time. There's an issue from Outland, in which a bunch of the Strips characters are on a couch and they're in their underwear and flabby and kind of sprawled out and wasting the day. And this fitness guy comes by, and he, across the Strips 8 panels, it's a Sunday strip, so it's the big one, is like critiquing their lifestyle, judging, like, look at you guys, you're wasting your life. And all the things he's saying are completely true. It's like, and the reader knows this. This guy's like fit, and he's got his little weights in the headband and everything. And he's condemning this, like, look at you, you're wasting away, you're not taking care of your bodies and the connection between your body and your mind. And he's like, and in the end, I'm going to live longer than you because you didn't make better decisions. And then he turns around to jog away, and a bolt of lightning hits him, and he explodes. And the characters on the couch look at one another and pass a ding dong across the couch. And and to me, that kind of encapsulates the self-help, the finiteness of the self-help phenomenon, which I think has, and I'm not a sociologist, but it seems to me that in a post-2020 world, especially during that really, like contentious time and out of it, everyone was like, we need something. We need something to make us better than we are. We need something to rise above the crappiness. And everyone was saying it from their respective sides of the aisle. They suck so bad. I want to be better than them. How do I do this? And then vice versa. So everyone's looking for the trick, but all the tricks conclude the same way, which is you dead.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to me, as and I make these jokes all the time, and I talk about this all the time. In fact, I told my wife the other day, I'm just put this somewhere where it'll be documented, that I was like, the best joke that someone could make at my funeral is if in all the somberness, everyone's so sad, and then somebody gets up on stage and says, well, he did say this would happen a lot, I think that would really lighten the mood. So I talk about this all the time, but one of the reasons is, it's funny. Another reason is that coming to terms with mortality has been an important part of the Christian, tradition of spiritual practice for centuries upon centuries. And the reason is not because they were so morbid. In fact, Christians are the opposite of morbid. They're like, obsessed with life, you know what I mean, and life beyond death. But Christians across history have understood that all our best efforts still conclude in death. I mean, it's across the Old and New Testament. This side of resurrection, the story concludes for a period in death before life has the final say. And so all our best efforts this side of resurrection meet the same punchline. That doesn't mean nothing matters, because Christians aren't nihilists, but it does mean that even if we do all the cold plunges you can possibly imagine and wake up early to lift weights and all the stuff, that bolt of lightning is still coming. You know what I mean? And it doesn't rob these things of meaning and purpose, but it does sober them. You know what I mean? And it gives us a sort of, like, I think, healthy wisdom to not fall into the cycle of like the next trick. There's a balance between sober-mindedness, an awareness of your own mortality, what we've called, across centuries, memento mori, remember death, remember you still have to die, and lapsing into despair. That's one bad side. And the other bad side is denial, like the idea that, my story doesn't end. And no one says that explicitly, but we infer that subconsciously. Sure. We live as if like all this stuff is somehow going to give me a longevity that's impossible. Yeah. And then the other side being like, well, what does really anything matter because it ends in right. death? That's not the Christian perspective either. So the in-between is kind of like this idea that I am at the mercy of my own limitations, that this side of resurrection, I don't beat mortality. I don't beat sin altogether. Jesus has, but in my own brokenness, I succumb to cycles of disintegration back to integration again. And of course you grow and mature and everything, but even the most sage-like, matured disciple of Jesus fails Yeah, even at the end of their story. And I think a lot about Brennan Manning, as a writer, he was a huge influence on this book, because you and we were just talking a minute ago about, like, if you can find that sweet spot of, like, where you're doing what you want to do and it has an impact on people. And I think that Manning kind of exemplifies
Yes.
that uniquely.
Yep.
His books are insane. If formatted, like, they're just like stories and fireworks, and then like scripture and then literature, and it's really not formatted the way most Christian nonfiction
Mhm.
is, and yet he's like iconic in the pantheon of Christian writers, because you read these books and you're changed, like you actually become changed
That's
by. I
amazing.
defy someone to read like Abba's Child and not come away
Yeah.
formed by that work. But he did not end well. His story concluded very tragically, with his brain succumbing to the effects of long-term alcoholism, and cycles of failure and repentance, for sure. Even at the very end of his life, he was embroiled, and I wrote about this in one of my books, embroiled in a minor controversy in which he, lied about his participation in hurricane relief after Hurricane Katrina, and then called, I believe it was Christianity Today, called the publication back and said, I was actually lying about the stuff that I said. And then they printed it. You know what I mean? Like, and you can look at that two ways. You can look at it like, that's so lame that he lied. And why?
Right,
Why
right,
do you
right.
need
For
to
what?
lie? That's embarrassing. And I looked up to this guy. Or you can look at it like, he called them back and told them he was lying. I
Right.
look up to this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that story to me exemplifies the, like, if you read his work, and I don't know the guy, I don't know him personally. I don't know all the skeletons in his closet. There's probably more than we know about, because that's true of everyone. But if you know the story and you read his work, he seems to me to be someone deeply familiar with the love of God and invested in the life of Christ, who also screwed up again and again and again, repented again and again and again. If that's not like a microcosm, a portrait of the story, and now he's dead. He's dead. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And he died unable to complete his memoir by himself. He
Yeah.
had to have people help him. And that shouldn't have been the case, but it was the case because of decisions he made.
Yeah.
And that to me is a portrait of life this side of resurrection
Right.
in a broken world. It's beautiful, it's redemptive, and it's also tragic, and it's also screwed up. And accepting that is like a lifelong journey. But the work of accepting that is also freedom from the
Mhm.
trap of there's a trick, there's a trick, there's a trick.
Yeah. There's so much there, because I think ultimately all of the tricks are just an accumulated effort to resist the one reality we desperately want to escape, which is that, no, I am God. I don't die. I am perfect. I can be in charge of my own existence. And again, death is that great, sobering, humility inducing leveler that we just
Yep.
can't escape from. And, I think maybe one of the people that typifies sort of our railing against that is Brian Johnson, the guy who's trying to live forever. I don't know if you remember the guy. He's got a company
I've
called
seen him in the popular culture. Yeah.
yeah.
The
Blueprint is
guy
his
with all the
company.
medicine and stuff.
And he takes like 147 pills a day and eats all of his meals before like 10:30 a.m. And I was listening to him being interviewed, and the host of the podcast was talking about his hair, and how he's like, "Hey, I'm getting into my early 30s. I can tell my hairline is receding. Like, what do I do?" And Brian cuts him off and is like, "Fight. You got to fight." He's like, "This is what I do. I wear an infrared skull cap for an hour. I take these 3 pills. I rub on these 3 ointments." And as I'm listening to this, I can't be the only one. I'm just like, dude, this is just, you're living to live. There's this circular just self-defeating nature to what you're doing. There's no objective to it. There's nothing that's grounding it. It's just desperately trying to cling on to hair was kind of the perfect symbol of
Yeah, totally.
of what that kind of, taken to the logical extreme, what that kind of worldview, the place that it ends up getting you. And I was listening to a clip of this Catholic priest talking about the whole Charlie Kirk tragedy and death, and he was just talking about how we are so quick to rush past death. Like, we don't contemplate it. We don't grieve. We don't, even in our, the ceremonies around funerals now are altering in such a way where we avoid it. We don't look at it. We don't look into it. And it kind of speaks to what you were saying about there is this power in not running from it, but staring into it and allowing it to have the sobering impact that it's supposed to have. Because we need the wisdom that it gives us, and we have a culture that's railing against it. And if we're not careful, that is what we then become sucked into as well.
Yeah, I agree. The irony of the live forever dude, which, I'm assuming based on what I do know from popular culture that,
by the way, he should rebrand himself as the live forever dude.
The live forever dude. Yeah. He's become something like he presents himself for our entertainment. And in most cases, it seems like our, mockery, because everyone watching can see what you're articulating, which is like, this is a fool's errand that you're on. And it ain't working. Like, because even if your methods pay off in some really unusual way, if you live to be 120 years old or some such thing, or you look young when you are old, whatever is the payoff, you will have spent your life dedicated to the thing that gave you more time, and then you used that time to do the thing that gave you more time.
Yes.
And then the sad irony is that some grizzled, unhealthy farmer in the Midwest who smoked cigarettes and didn't take care of himself is going to end with more contentment, more peace, and a life of more love that just spent the evenings like doing nothing but hanging out with his kids and around a dinner table and goes to bed grateful for, the kind of life that a lot of us would go like, oh, nothing happened. But, and yet he did finish well, whereas this, somebody else doesn't finish well. And the difference isn't even necessarily always like an acceptance of mortality so much as it is an acceptance of existence itself, that there are.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this like I'm some kind of sage, and I this is not something I have learned. And God talks to me about it all the time, that I have this innate thing that a lot of us have, which is like, if I do some other thing that matters, I will lend validity and value and worth to my life. And I need to do that. Even things like, I've on my best day, I do something like writing or teaching the Bible genuinely because I love to do them, and I actually care about communicating these ideas in a way that means something to people or that changes people in some way. On my best day. On my worst day, I'm thinking, man, if I write another book, people will think I'm so smart and they'll love me more, and then I'll have more value. I don't explicitly say these things, but subconsciously, these are the machinations of my flesh, if you like.
Yeah.
And, and then I'll sit in the quiet in the morning with God and be like, man, it's still, look, what is life? I live on this little road and in this little house with my little family, and I haven't done some amazing thing that's changed the world. And I feel like instead of God saying like, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, or saying like, don't worry, man, the next big thing, the next big apostolic movement is coming through your book. Instead, he's like, yeah, what if this is it? What if this is all I have for you, is to just sit in this house and love your family and do the best you can with what you have? And part of it is that Christian culture, church culture. And I don't, I don't have it out for Christian culture and church culture. I love the church. I love the Christian movement. So I feel so tired and bored with these people that are like still railing against, the entity of Christian culture, like it's still the late 90s or something. It's such a dorky thing to do. I don't have it out for these things, but culture communicates a story, any culture.
Yeah.
And the culture of Christians communicates a story. The culture of the church communicates a story. And because we're so inspired by the life and work of Jesus, and because we take his commands seriously to preach the gospel and to baptize people in the name of the Father, Son, all this stuff. And because there are people who have been given assignments that are very big, to do justice work across the world.
Sure.
By the grace of God, thank God for them. we tend to look at everyone, at other people and go like, oh crap, I'm not doing it right
Mm-hmm.
because I haven't started an orphanage in Calcutta, or I'm not doing it right because I have not evangelized to my entire street and brought them to faith.
Yeah.
And, and maybe sometimes it's possible that there's an element of truth in that, like God has called you to something and you've resisted it. God has called you to something bigger than your little story and you've resisted it. But maybe a lot of the time, your little story is the story. And
Mm-hmm.
God's invitation is for you to embrace your place in the kingdom of God, which is like there are kids that you need to care for and that you need to bring them into the presence of Jesus. There's a community of people in your purview that you need to care for, that you need to practice justice and generosity in a tiny sphere of your influence, because that's what you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not just okay, that's good. That's what God has handed over to you, and if you don't miss it, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I'm still trying to learn.
Well, and it's even sort of resisting the other end of the pendulum swing where you kind of, well, maybe, it's just to love this little humble calling, and that'll define, or that'll populate my little meaning basket enough. And it's like, no, that's not the point. It's not that you're consummated in something big or somehow more noble in that it's not big and that, it's not visible and not seen. It's that none of it is supposed to fill what only God can, right? That it's just about being faithful and it's obedient. And, you see that driving desire and people putting their names on buildings and kings building pyramids, and everyone's trying to kind of like cement their mortality or actually create some sense of immortality through the things that they do. And that same driving instinct is in us. And like you said, we almost seem to want to earn it each day. Like, did I justify my existence today? Am I inching towards a life that would be worthy of, something by one more page written of a new book or whatever it is? And just to maybe end here, there's a quote, many quotes in your book, but one of the ones that just kind of really hit me hard was this idea. You say at the end, it's kind of a reflection on your own journey. And you talk about dying, and you say, the kind of dying that matters most is the ongoing process of surrendering to love. And I just was so blown away by that, because ultimately it's not sort of you kind of this begrudging sense of I give up significance and I'll just be the humble, anonymous servant. It's not the giving up of anything. It's the receiving of something so much better. Maybe kind of to end here, talk about that, because I feel like that is it. That when you get a taste of real love given to me by my dad, it helps you recognize that, man, everything else is house money. I've already won.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, over the last couple of years, I have been and really just like the last 2 years of life have been relearning something that, I've known, but have come to know in, I guess, with greater intimacy. And not to say that I've arrived, because I really haven't, but like I've, for the last 10 years, been participating in something that will probably become known as like the new spiritual formation movement or something. And it's a kind of like church practice movement built around a rediscovery of disciplines and a rule of life as the lived experience of discipleship, kind of developed off the thinking of Dallas Willard and writers like Richard Foster, the celebration of disciplines, things like that, that if we reorient our churches around formation as opposed to like weekend experiences, then people would actually become more like Jesus through practice. And it's not based on nothing. It's, like whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, you know what I mean? It's a good thing, a beautiful thing. But over 10 years of like teaching that, of attempting to embody that, there's these little moments in life where you realize like, man, so I have gone against my own wiring and desires to learn how to implement the practice of fasting, for example. It's no fun. And then you've experienced the benefit of like what fasting can and has done in the Christian tradition over centuries. And you're like, man, this is really an incredible thing that I didn't even know about. And it has brought me closer to God. So it's not nothing. It is something. In the same way that, like exercise is, if properly implemented, you will experience changes in your body and your mind from exercise. It's not nothing. It's something. But then you'll be like at, a Sunday gathering with other people, and then God will change someone incredibly in an evening, over like one, and not from some sermon, not from fasting, just like the Holy Spirit comes through, says something to someone.
Yeah.
They turn around. They don't even know what it means. They turn around, communicate it to the person next to them. Hey, I think this is kind of for you. I saw a balloon, whatever it is.
Yeah.
The person's mind is like, tears come down.
Yeah.
And they discover the love of God in a way that 10 years of fasting did not do. And that doesn't mean that fasting's nothing. It's something. Jesus did it. We do it. You know what I mean? But like, that can't be regimented. That can't even be structured. Like, it was completely chaotic. Like, no one planned for it except God. And so over the past 2 years, even in the process of starting the book, which, it does have a whole section called the Manual of Disciplines. It's about lifestyle practices of Jesus. But I just was like, the love of God is the thing, and there's no like perfect quantification of it. There's no way to corral it. There's no way to structure it perfectly. We have tools that put us in a better proximity of the love of God.
Yeah.
But they are resources that turn our attention towards something that's already there. The way you put it, you already have it. All that the disciplines do is redirect your attention to what you already have, and in abundance. You know what I mean? And that's a hard thing to write about. So there's a lot of language in the book about like the tsunami of God's love, about like how it just moves over things and destroys things and reshapes things. And we stand in front of it going like, hold on, and it's just like, no, it's coming. You know what I mean? And it can reform you or deform you depending on how you receive it. I think that there's a reason that the primary metaphor for God's relationship to his people in the scriptures is marriage, because I realized that across these 10 years of teaching formation through disciplines, there's so many times that I've said things that are true in some sense, but in another sense, you're like, wait, but you can't get around the thing or the reality that I'm teaching. You do the thing to get the thing, because that's the gospel of self-help. You do these things because you get these things from them. And that's just not the God. It's antithetical to the gospel of Jesus. You don't do the things to get the things. You have the thing. You do the things because they make you more aware of what you have.
Already have. Wow.
Yeah. And so that to me, it reshaped the writing process. The entire thing became more about like the absolute devastating power of God's love, and less like, okay, put these things into practice so that you can get the thing, which I never would have said that's what I was writing, but subconsciously you fall into these patterns because we've been taught to receive them. The marriage thing to me is what makes the most sense. If someone said, there's all these things in spiritual formation, some good, some bad, about like something called stage theory, the idea that you progress in the spiritual journey toward a thing. And of course you do grow and mature. You see that represented in the scriptures and the teachings of Jesus and Paul and blah, blah, blah. But even that is a very dicey place to go, I think, because if someone were to say, to me and my wife, Abby, you're like, okay, you've been married for almost 18 years now. So are you on stage 2 or 3? You know what I mean? I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
There's like, have you arrived at the goal? Because the implication is that you're moving from level 1 to level 10 to beat the game. Like, how close are you to beating the game? Like, what? There is no game. We just live together. We're just, like we share life together. That's the thing. The goal is just that, like, as cheesy as it sounds, like we love one another and have decided to merge our lives together. And have we grown and matured as individuals and as a couple? Well, of course, inevitably, but there's no finish line. There's no goal. The entire thing is just life together. And I'm coming to a place more and more where I'm trying to learn to accept No goal, no finish line, just life together.
Wow. Well, I think that perfectly sums it up. Dude, this conversation just flew by, as it always does. I so resonate with what you're saying. I appreciate the work that you've put in to put this book out there. I will put it everywhere, the links and all that. I know you're not concerned about that, but also we'll just throw this up here real quick. So, I thought I had it up here. I had your website all ready to go. I mean, this is how high quality of production this is. JoshuaSPorter.com. We'll just go the manual approach. But like I said, it'll be in the intro. It'll be in the links and all the things. But dude, thank you. Thanks for making this work. Sorry for the back and forth on that. But hey, I so resonate with what you're saying. And I look forward to what you're going to do next. And hopefully we can have another chat down the road.
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me. I had a genuinely good time. So thanks for making the time for me.
That was the goal. All right, man. You have a good rest of your day. I'm going to hit end here. Make sure your file gets uploaded before we totally end the call. But thanks for listening, everyone. Peace. Thanks for watching Provoke Inspire. If you enjoyed this content, could you do me a favor and hit that like button? Leave us a comment, because this ultimately is a conversation. Hit that bell thing, I think, right? And YouTube seems to be recommending another video for you to watch. Check it out. Stay involved. Also, ProvokeInspirePodcast.com for everything else. That's it. Peace.